Hello, class. Hopefully you can chat with me. Good to see everybody. I think that there's a few people online. Give me one moment, please. And I just realized I need to print something off. Hang on. Give me 1 sec. Okay. Good to see everybody. Let's do some housekeeping real quick. First off, today we're going to go over section 3 of the Nietzsche essay, the Dionysiac World Wiew. We will do that today. We will finish Nietzsche next Monday, and then next Wednesday will be, hello everyone, next Wednesday will be our review for the final exam. Does that sound right to y'all? Is that consistent with the reading schedule? I think that that's right. I think that our next class is, our last class is a week from today. And so on that class period, we will review for the final exam. I also want to say that I have determined a format for the final exam. I'm going to require that you guys, first off, I'm going to give you the final exam before class, or maybe at the beginning of class on Wednesday. And then during the final exam period, I'm going to give you, like, I think it's 2 hours, whatever the normal window is for submitting a final exam. I'm going to give you that same window and have you email me the final exam. Okay. So does that make sense? I just sort of summarized the rest of the semester as well as the final exam. Does that make sense to everyone? Does anyone have any questions about that? Next, I'm going to talk to you about my progress in grading stuff, okay? But does that make sense, what I just said about the rest of the semester and the final exam? Our last class will be a week from today. On Monday, we will finish discussing the Nietzsche text. On Wednesday, we will go over the final exam. And I'm also, we'll go over the final exam, okay? Hope that makes sense. And now let me tell you about my grading progress. First off, I did recalibrate your grades for quiz 3. Basically, I disregarded question 3, which was defective. And I graded it as if there were only 2 questions. So you either got a 0 or a 9 or an 18. Sadly, I have not started grading your midterm essays. I am very, very, very sorry about that. Hopefully, I will have half of them graded by Monday, at least half. And I suspect that I will. I'm going to grade 10 or 15 of them tomorrow, I hope. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about that? Today in class, we will go probably up until about 5:05, 5:10. Any questions so far? I will tell you that the thing that makes me saddest about the coronavirus thing, when I think about you guys, when I think about my class, is that every semester, near the end of the semester, we've had a party usually it's at my house. And I was looking forward to that, but I don't think we're going to be able to do it because of coronavirus stuff. So I don't see any questions from anybody. So why don't we just dive into Nietzsche? And let's see if we can do a little bit of review from last time. Because last time we discussed section 2 of the essay, the Dionysiac World Wiew. And I tell you what, I'll give you a true or false question. True or false? And I want everyone to type this in on the comments. Um, true or false? In Nietzsche's opinion, the Greek gods like Zeus and Athena and all those folks, in Nietzsche's opinion, the Greek gods were the ultimate explanatory principles of reality. True or false? I'll repeat the question. In Nietzsche's opinion, the Greek deities like Zeus and Athena were the ultimate were the ultimate explanatory principles of the world. That's right. It's false. Good job. Who can tell me what, according to Nietzsche, was more ultimate than the gods? And there's two possible answers for this question. Nietzsche says for the Greeks, the gods were not ultimate. Okay, well, what was ultimate in Nietzsche's opinion? Megan says will. That's a really good guess. It's not what he says, okay? I think that Nietzsche would say that will is ultimate, and he gets that from Schopenhauer, and we're going to talk about that next class because in section 4 of the essay, Nietzsche goes back to Schopenhauer. But Christopher Womble is correct. Fate. Fate is one of the two principles which, according to Nietzsche, the ancient Greeks viewed as ultimate. Fate is one. Justin says fate or nature. Good guess, Justin. Not nature. I'm looking for another word that begins with N. Not nature, but what? Anyone know? Okay, not nature, but necessity. For Nietzsche, the ultimate explanatory opinion of the Greeks, in his opinion, is either fate or necessity, okay? It's not the gods. Now, let me ask you another question. Would Christianity interpretation of the gods there? I don't know if you can even understand that question. Let me put it like this. I think that Christianity would give a high five to the Greeks there because I think that on the one hand, Christianity would give a high five to the Greeks there. On the other hand, they would give a thumbs down to the Greeks there. Christianity would give a high five to the Greeks because there's a sense in which characters in a story are not ultimate for Christianity. Okay. In other words, yes, Christians have a story, Christians have a mythos that has all sorts of characters in it, like Abraham, like Adam and Eve, even like Jesus. But there's another sense in which the one true God is above all of that and prior to all of that. But in another sense, I think that and so in that sense, Christians would give the Greeks a high five for downplaying the characters in the story, aka the gods, and exalting to a principle of supreme authority some principle like fate or necessity. There's a sense in which Christianity does that same thing. I mean, after all, God is being. That's a principle. That's an abstract, impersonal principle that's kind of like fate or necessity. On the other hand, though, Christians would say that the Greeks are wrong to demote the gods, in Nietzsche's opinion, and to exalt these abstract principles like fate or necessity. Christians would say that that's wrong. Now, why would Christians say that the Greeks are wrong to demote Zeus and Athena and submit them to these other principles and say that they're subject to these other principles? Why would Christianity say that that's wrong? I'm getting some texts. These are not students. Nope, these are not students. That's a tough question. But, this is a tough class, and I'm wanting y'all to think some tough thoughts. And by the way, this would be a really good essay question. Richard says Christianity disproves God being almighty. Jared says because the divine beings are the end all and be all in Christianity. Okay, I can tell y'all are thinking some good thoughts. Let me ask you this: who is the ultimate character in the Christian story? Who is the ultimate character in the Christian story? See, Zeus and Athena are characters in the Greek story, in the Greek mythos. Okay, Richard, I'm looking for a better answer than God. Nathan is correct. Jesus. Jesus is the ultimate character, the ultimate flesh and blood character in the Christian mythos. And there's a sense in which Jesus is kind of like Zeus or Poseidon and Athena. How? Because he is a character in a story. Now, am I saying that Jesus is not real? No. Am I saying that Jesus is not God? No. But still, he's a character in the story. And so, see, this is why I frame my whole entire class in terms of this dialectic or this relationship between mythos on the one hand and logos on the other, or between story on the one hand and science on the other. See, when we talk about the gods like Zeus and Poseidon, we're talking about a story, not science, but a story, right? But when we talk about so for example, when we talk about Parmenidean being, that's not a story, that's science, right? That's something kind of like Plato's realm of being, which we described in terms of mathematical symbols, right? Like a triangle. A triangle is an expression of timeless truths. A triangle has 180 degrees in the angles, whether you're on Africa or in Asia or on Antarctica or in North America, right? That was true. The fact that triangles have angles that add up to 180 degrees, that was true 1,000 years ago, and it will be true 1,000 years from now, right? By the way, that's true on the moon. That's true on an asteroid in the asteroid belt in our solar system. It's also true on Alpha Centauri. It's even true in a black hole. I would argue that even in a black hole, where the space-time laws of nature collapse and become a big mess, even there, it's true that the angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees. That's timeless truth. See, that's not a mythos. That's not a story. That's scientia. And that's kind of like Parmenidean being. But the crazy thing about Christianity is that it has this story, this mythos, that's kind of like the Greek gods. One difference is that Christians claim that their story is actually historical, and we could talk about what that means. I wish that I would have talked about what that means more in this class. Maybe I'll do that more next semester. But the point is that for Christianity, there's the story, but the story is ultimate. There is nothing, according to Christianity, more ultimate than Jesus Christ. Right? Jesus Christ is God. To quote the Nicene Creed, he's very God of one being with the Father, right? So what's weird about Christianity that I've been trying to get you to see this entire class, this entire semester, is that for Christianity, the mythos is ultimate. The mythos is the way that we are able to enter into the logos, all right? It's kind of like without a story, you can't have science, because the Christian story is the Jesus story, which is also rooted in the story of Israel. Okay, it's the Bible. That's the Christian story. That's the Christian mythos. That is the equivalent of Homer, I mean Zeus, the Iliad, the Odyssey, all that sort of stuff. So all I'm trying to say right now is you can use Nietzsche and what he says about the ancient Greeks and the tragedians. You can use that as a way to think about Christianity, as a way to analyze Christianity. I'm trying to say to you that for Christianity, the mythos, on the one hand, it's ultimate because, after all, what could be more ultimate than Jesus of Nazareth? But on the other hand, um, there is a sense in which God the Father is more ultimate than the God man, and yet there's another sense in which there's not. So Christianity is kind of like giving a high five to the mythos people, kind of like the Greek gods, like Nietzsche. Nietzsche's a mythos person, but it also gives a high five to the Scientia people, like Parmenides, and like Aristotle's notion of the unmoved mover, thought thinking itself, theos. Okay. I hope that makes sense. I want to say that one thing and I want to say it in a different way, and I'm kind of amazed that I'm getting off on this long rabbit trail. But I want to say this whole thing in a different way. There was this guy named Lessing who lived, I think, in the 18th century. He was a German, and Lessing said that there is an impenetrable, ugly ditch, a ditch that separates two things. What are the two things that this ugly ditch separates? On the one hand, it separates the eternal truths of reason. Now, let me ask you a question, class. I hope you're listening. These eternal truths of reason, does that sound like Plato's notion of being or Plato's notion of becoming? These eternal truths of reason, is that more like being or becoming? Also, is it more like mythos or science? Nope. Christopher and Richard, let me rephrase that. So, oh, no, you're right. I'm wrong. The eternal truths of reason are like being. That's right, because they're unchangeable. What Lessing says is that there's this ditch, this impenetrable, ugly ditch that separates the eternal truths of reason from the contingent truths of history. Now, the contingent truths of history, does that sound more like Platonic being or Platonic becoming? That's right, Jared and Richard. Now, let me ask the question in a different way. So you've got these two things, right? You've got Lessing's ditch in the middle, and then over here, you've got the eternal truths of reason. Over here, you have the contingent truths of history. Which of those two things, eternal reason or contingent history, which of those two things sounds more like the realm of Fuchsius, which is also the realm of nature? Which of the two things, eternal reason or contingent history, which of those two things more sounds more like the realm of Fuchsius or nature? Incorrect, Justin. So see, history is contingent. What does contingent mean? It means that so nature, Fuchsius, the Platonic realm of being, is the realm of contingency, right? It's the realm of, remember, generation and corruption, like an acorn growing into an oak tree, or a tadpole growing into a frog, or a little baby growing up and becoming a human being. The realm of Fuchsius is the realm of generation and corruption. It's the realm of change. Those are contingent truths. That is not like a triangle, which is eternal reason, right? Let me ask you, let me put it to you a different way. You've got Lessing's ditch, and over here you have eternal reason, and over here you have contingent history, okay? Which of those two things is more like science? There's science and myth. Which of those two things is more like science? Eternal reason or contingent history? Which of those two things is more like science? Scientia. And remember, for Aristotle, scientia, science, does not change. It's like those the angles of a triangle. That's right. Eternal reason. Okay, y'all, what I'm trying to do, and let me say one more thing about Lessing's ditch. What Lessing's ditch is talking about is Jesus. Like Lessing is writing in the context of what's called the historical critical method of biblical interpretation. It was basically his thought takes place in the context of German liberal biblical scholars who are basically wanting to say that the New Testament is a bunch of BS, that it can't be trusted. And so Lessing is like, yeah, how could we expect the God-man, a first century Jewish carpenter, to teach us anything about ultimate reality and metaphysics and what's ultimately true, right? And what he wants to say is it can't. Jesus of Nazareth, some dude that lived, I mean, supposedly he lived, but whether he lived in actual history or not, he's presented as a character in a story. How could a character in a story tell us what's ultimately true and unchanging in eternity? How could a historical figure tell us anything that's true and ultimately unchanging, metaphysically true? Lessing says it can't. There's this huge ditch between these two things, between eternal reason / science / ultimate truth / metaphysics on the one hand, and on the other side of that ditch, you have contingent facts of history, you have the changing realm of nature, and you have story and mythos. Okay? So I hope that makes sense. All I'm trying to say is Nietzsche's thought here, this notion of how the Greeks, yeah, they believed in the gods, they talked about the gods, but they did not actually believe that the gods were ultimately explanatory. They said that the gods are submitted to something higher, something unchanging, some abstract principle. And what is that unchanging abstract principle? It's not thought thinking itself. It's fate or necessity. Okay? And I'm trying to say, on the one hand, Christians would give the Greeks a high five on that because they understand that abstract metaphysics is ultimate in some sense. After all, Christians believe that God is being. Christians believe that God does not change. Remember the simplicity of God. That's all that stuff, right? But on the other hand, Christians have this story. And what's crazy about the story for Christians is that they say that the story actually does link up with eternal reason. That's what Nietzsche is saying the Greeks don't think. The Greeks don't think that their story links up with the ultimate principles. Christians say they do. And that's what makes Christianity unique. Okay, y'all, I'm going to keep going. Actually, let me ask you one more question. This is a review question from section 2, and I think that this will be all the review that we do today. And after this question, we'll go on to section 3. But my review question for y'all for section 2 of the Nietzsche article is this: how is Medusa a metaphor for the Dionysian? How is Medusa a metaphor for the Dionysian? By the way, that would be a great quiz question. I mean, a great question for the final exam. How is Medusa like the Dionysian? Megan says you can't look at it. That's right. That's right. Jared says because she's so terrifying to look at / understand. That's right. Jared and Megan, what happens if you do look at it? What happens if you do look at it? That's right, Christopher. They are both so horrifying that looking at them makes you die. That's exactly right. Good. Y'all, why don't we move on beyond section 2 and let's talk about section 3. Remember, on Monday, we're going to talk about section 4. Let's talk about section 3 for at least 30 or 40 minutes, and then we'll call it a day, okay? Section 3 is amazing. You have it on your handout, the PDF that I put on Canvas. Section 3 begins on page 129 of your PDF. And like we did last time, I want to kind of go through it paragraph by paragraph. And I'm just going to read my notes as I typically do. And we're going to take it paragraph by paragraph. So paragraph number 1, which is the paragraph that begins the ecstasy of the Dionysiac state. Paragraph 1, Nietzsche outlines 2 different states, okay? You've got A and B, okay? State A and state B. Here's state A. Drunkenness, intoxication, having a buzz, getting high, that's A. B is the experience of being hungover. A is the high. B, you could call B either coming down off of a high, or you could call it the low, okay? Remember how we talked about how Dionysius, the Greek god Dionysius, is all about intoxication, these experiences of euphoria whenever you are intoxicated. He also associated with this notion of intoxication is things like orgies and sexual experience, and maybe even things like domination and stuff like that. That's the Dionysian, the Greek god Dionysius, aka Bacchus. And so Nietzsche is talking about these 2 states. On the one hand, you have the high of intoxication, and then on the other hand, you have the low of maybe coming down. Maybe you could call it the low of crashing. Maybe you could call it the low of a hangover, or maybe you could call it the low of ordinary mundane life, okay? Nietzsche is saying that for the Greeks, basically they thought that life kind of sucks. And so the goal is to escape it. And that's what tragedy allows them to do, right? So you've got these 2 states. On the one hand, intoxication. On the other hand, crashing, coming down to mundane life. One of my favorite writers is a 20th century Catholic author named Walker Percy. And he, in some of his texts, he talks about re-entry problems. Nietzsche is talking about the same thing here. He's saying that it's like if you can escape the world into this Dionysiac, euphoric intoxication, that is wonderful. It's awesome. The only problem is eventually you're going to come back down. You have to re-enter the world, re-enter mundane reality, and it stinks. Okay, that's paragraph number 1. Continuing in paragraph number 1, what Nietzsche is saying is that the Greeks were so desperate. They were so desperate to escape the nauseating trauma of tragic experience. If you've studied ancient Greek thought, then you might think about Achilles. Achilles is a good example of a tragic figure, but also Oedipus Rex. These are 2 examples of tragic figures. And for the Greeks, they're so desperate to escape that sense of tragic fate or necessity. I mean, Oedipus ends up crashing and burning out of necessity. It's not because simply he made some decision that was foolish. No, he's fated to crash and burn, right? And for the Greeks, according to Nietzsche, that is so traumatic, and they are so motivated to try to escape that they embrace a radical form of escapism. And let me just ask you, what is the form of escapism that the Greeks embrace? What is the form of escapism that the Greeks embrace? Maybe you might know someone who tries to escape their problems with alcohol or video games. There's lots of ways to escape, right? But what is the thing that the Greeks turned to in order to escape? Plays. Very good, Nathan. That's correct. Nathan, what kind of plays? There's a particular kind of plays. Art. Christopher says art. That's good. Marissa says tragic plays. That's right. Very good. It's tragic drama, tragic theater. Good, Jared. Tragic art, tragic plays that the Greeks took refuge in to try to escape this the traumatic truth of reality. That's exactly right. Okay? That's paragraph 1. Let's go to paragraph 2. Paragraph 2 starts on page 130. By the way, if you guys have any questions, please let me know in the chat area. Paragraph number 2. What Nietzsche says is kind of interesting. I'm not totally sure I understand it. I'm also not totally sure that he's completely consistent. But in paragraph 2, he says that the goal of tragedy is not to suppress the Dionysian. He says that would be futile. It would be this intoxicating urge that came into Europe from Asia, this force that really is the ultimate principle of reality. Schopenhauer called it das Ureine. I call it the primordial one. You could also call it the will. This Dionysian drive is so strong, Nietzsche says, that it would be futile to try to suppress it. And by the way, if you were to try to suppress it, Nietzsche says something very interesting. He says that it would erupt elsewhere. In other words, and Nietzsche here sounds very much like Freud. It's as if you try to suppress your trauma, if you try to suppress the dark side of your drives that are inside of you, it's going to pop out somewhere else, right? You're going to end up expressing those dark desires in some unhealthy way, some uncontrollable way, some way that might end up causing damage to someone else. You might burst out in anger. You might go into some sort of fit. You might have a temper tantrum. You might go crazy. Nietzsche says it's futile to try to suppress these deep Dionysian forces. And so instead, what the Greeks are trying to do, Nietzsche says, is to provide healing, a therapeutic remedy for this traumatic reality at the heart of the world. The Greeks are trying to provide healing for it, for this experience of trauma, which for them is the human condition. Okay? That's paragraph 2. Paragraph 3, Nietzsche sort of slices and dices some of the characteristics of tragedy, and he introduces these 2 themes of the sublime and the comical. What Nietzsche says is that the sublime tames. The sublime is what tames these Dionysian forces. And so, see, that's kind of why I'm wondering if he's slightly inconsistent. What's the difference between taming and suppressing? Not totally sure. But anyway, in paragraph 3, he says that tragedy employs the sublime and the comical, and the specific role of the sublime, Nietzsche says, is to tame the Dionysian. It's to tame the will at the heart of reality. The latter, in other words, comedy, the role of the comical is not to tame the harsh force of the Dionysian. Rather, the role of the comical is to discharge it. So it's kind of like the role of the comic is to provide a coping mechanism that can allow you to release some of that pent-up tension, some of that deep trauma that you have as a result of the horrific nature of reality. Okay, good, Richard. I like that. Yeah, you're kind of agreeing with me that Nietzsche might be somewhat inconsistent here. Anyway, these two modes, the sublime and the comical, these two modes constitute kind of a middle state, kind of a middle ground between these two other states. So I talked about the high and the low a minute ago, right? The high is drunkenness, intoxication, the euphoria of escape, and then the low is crashing, coming back down, mundane reality. You've got the highs and the lows. And what Nietzsche says that these two things of the sublime and the comical, what they do, they're kind of like a middle ground between the highs and the lows. Okay. He says that they're a middle state between the high of intoxication and the low of revulsion. This traumatic horror of coming back down from some sort of intoxicating high, he says that it's revulsive. Okay, so what tragedy does in the form of the sublime and the comical is it gives us a middle realm between the highs and the lows, intoxication and revulsion. Okay, that's paragraph 3. In paragraph 4, he says that they also sort of, and this is probably another way of saying the same thing. He says that tragedy in the form of the sublime and the comical, it creates a middle world between the Dionysian and the Apollonian, right? In this way, tragedy goes beyond beauty and yet does not seek the truth. Okay, that's an important quote. Tragedy, quote, goes beyond beauty and does not seek the truth. That is about halfway down in paragraph number 4. Paragraph number 4 starts with the sublime and the comical. About halfway down, he says that tragedy, quote, goes beyond beauty and yet does not seek the truth. So beauty there, is beauty there talking about the Apollonian or the Dionysian? What do you think? Is beauty talking about the Apollonian or the Dionysian? What do you think? You've got these two things. The Apollonian, it's the realm of images, art, sculpture, dreams. And then you've got the Dionysian, which is, I don't know, different from that. Apollonian, good job, y'all. Richard, it's the Dionysian, because remember, Richard, the Apollonian is art, sculpture. That's the realm of beauty, right? Images, things like this. So what Nietzsche is saying about tragedy here in the form of the sublime and the comical is that they provide a middle way between beauty, that's the Apollonian, and truth. Truth he identifies with the Dionysian, right? And that makes sense. The Apollonian is kind of like an illusion that shields us from the horrific truth about reality. The Dionysian is the truth about reality, or it's a personification of the truth about reality. Yeah. So tragedy is between those two things. It doesn't totally seek the truth, but it also doesn't simply dabble in the beautiful. In other words, it's got a little bit of truth in there, but not too much. It's got a little bit. In other words, what tragedy does is it peels back the veil of your illusions and shows you a little bit of reality, a little bit of nihilism, a little bit of the chaos at the heart of the world, a little bit of the vortex of the will. But it doesn't show you so much that it'll kill you. It gives it to you. It's like a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down, right? It's shielding you from the horror of reality while also letting you see a little bit of it. Okay, yeah, and that's paragraph number 4. The sublime and the comical make up a middle world between the Dionysian and the Apollonian. In this way, tragedy goes beyond beauty and yet does not seek the truth. It's in the middle, right? Note here that Nietzsche identifies the Dionysian with the chorus. This is an important sub-theme. Do y'all know what the chorus is in Greek tragedy? So in Greek tragedy, you've got these characters, characters that usually wear masks. So in Oedipus Rex, Oedipus would be a character. His mother, whose name I can't remember, would be a character. Is his father named Laertes? His father would be a character. The blind seer, prophet, wise man guy would be a character. There's all these characters, and they usually wear masks. But then you've got the chorus, right? And can anyone tell me anything about the chorus? The chorus, first off, there's several people in the chorus. Like the chorus isn't just one person. The chorus is several people, maybe 5 people, maybe 10 people, maybe 50 people. But you've got the chorus, and they don't just say things and they don't act things out. Rather, they sing. They sing their lines. The chorus's role is more musical. Now, let me ask y'all this. Do you remember what I said about how in Nietzsche's mind, there's something very special about music? In Nietzsche's mind, there's something very special about music. There's some sense in which music is particularly connected to the Dionysian. There's something about music which is particularly connected to this notion of intoxication and this kind of orgiastic high or pleasure that you might get from some sort of festival. I always think about ACL Fest in Austin, but you might think about Woodstock. Woodstock happened, I think, in like 1969 in New York, 3 years before I was born. But in Woodstock, certainly people were intoxicated. They were euphoric. They felt like they were at one with everyone else, and also at one with the musicians, and also at one with reality and nature, right? There's a oneness, there's a euphoria, there's a pleasure, there's an intoxication that happened at Woodstock. Something similar might happen for some people at ACL Fest, or think about a rock concert or any kind of concert. It could be classical music, something that you've attended involving music, and maybe you have felt this kind of euphoric oneness, okay? That's what Nietzsche's getting at with the chorus. The chorus's role in Greek tragedy is musical. It's musical, and it's also not individual. Remember how we've talked about the principle of individuation, the idea that there are limits around things. So for example, the reason I know that my iPhone is different, it's a different object from my cup, right? That's the kind of difference that Parmenides rejected, right? Parmenides says, no, it cannot be that in being, you've got multiplicity or diversity or more than one thing. Remember whack-a-being? Parmenides says, anytime you even think about being, you have to whack a being. And how does the existence of my iPhone and the cup imply non-being? I'll tell you how. It's because the iPhone is not the cup. The cup is not this pad of sticky notes, right? These are two things, and that implies non-being. And so that's the kind of thing that Parmenides says, that's BS. That can't be right. That has to be an illusion, because being must be simple, not changing, not consisting in parts and wholes, not spatially extended. All of that stuff that makes up simplicity, which we know by way of negative or apophatic theology, right? Parmenides there is denying multiplicity, two things. Well, guess what? In the chorus is channeling the spirit of the Dionysian, which also says there's no such thing as the principle of individuation, baby. All is one. It's not the case that at Woodstock, Sonny Bono and Cher and whoever, I don't even know who is performing at Woodstock, but it's not the case that these rock stars like Jimi Hendrix were on the stage, and then you've got you down in the audience. No, all is one. You can feel the hippie love, right? This is the Dionysian. It's kind of a hippie mentality, but it's a denial of the principle of individuation. And that's why you've got the chorus, because the chorus is seen as not a group of like 5 people. Here's Sarah, here's Sally in the chorus, and here's Joe in the chorus. No. It's just a mass. It's a blob. It's an undifferentiated mass of stuff in the chorus. By the way, that should sound to you like Heraclitus's salad dressing mixture. That's not a coincidence. Nietzsche is saying that the chorus undermines the principle of individuation, right? The Apollonian realm of art, pictures, images, this reinforces the principle of individuation because, after all, you can't draw a picture. You can't even see a picture unless there's individual objects, right? I mean, the baby Jesus here is not the same thing as that tree. So you've got different objects that are delimited or separated or distinguished by the principle of individuation. That's art. Art for Nietzsche operates on the principle of individuation, this idea that limits exist between things, that this phone is delimited from this cup. Remember, Heraclitus wants to say that they're flowing in and out of each other, that reality is a blooming, buzzing confusion, like the static picture from a TV screen in the 1970s, right? Everything's flowing in and out of each other. But art says, no, look, here's one thing and here's another thing. So art reinforces the principle of individuation, and that's the Apollonian. But the Dionysian says, no, that's just an illusion. The reality is that the world is a swirling vortex of forces of the will. And the point of the chorus for Nietzsche is that it channels that spirit. First off, by way of music, and second off, because it undermines the principle of individuation, because the chorus is just a blob of people. It's a mass of people. It's not discrete entities. It's one blob. Okay? Let me put it a different way. In the chorus, the identities of the members are not discrete and clear. You don't, like, everyone in the chorus is the same. It's not like there's five people. Here's Sally, Henry, Bob, Frank, and Joe, and each of them are different. No, they're all sort of lumped in together, okay? So that's the point of the chorus. And note here in paragraph 4 that Nietzsche identifies the Dionysian with the chorus, not with any individual character, okay? Now, I'm going to skip paragraph 5. Let's jump to paragraph 6. I am running out of time, but it's going to be okay. And in paragraph 6, Nietzsche begins to discuss two specific playwrights, two specific writers of ancient Greek tragedy. Who can tell me who they are? Who are the two playwrights that Nietzsche begins to discuss in paragraph 6? Paragraph 6 begins with two types. Yes, Richard. In paragraph 6, which is on page 131, Nietzsche begins to discuss two different ancient tragedians, two different playwrights. Euripides is not one, Jared. I'm impressed that you said that. Nietzsche has a lot to say about Euripides. He's not a big fan of Euripides, but we don't have time to talk about why that is right now. Euripides is not one of the two. In The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche compares and contrasts Euripides with Aeschylus. And Aeschylus is one of the two playwrights that he's talking about right here in paragraph 6 on page 131. Who is the other one? There's Aeschylus and one other ancient playwright / tragedian that Nietzsche discusses. Who is it? It's not Aeschylus. It's not Euripides. Who is it? Who can tell me? Sophocles. Very good, Richard. Sophocles. Okay, so in paragraph 6, Nietzsche begins to discuss Aeschylus and Sophocles. And I'm just going to read my notes because I'm getting a little bit short on time, and I was hoping to actually read a couple of paragraphs. and I am running out of time. I'm just going to read my notes. Aeschylus sees the sublime in justice. For Aeschylus, man is proximate to the gods. In other words, man is close to the gods. For Aeschylus, both God and man are weighed on the scales of justice. So you remember earlier how we were talking about how for Nietzsche, the Greeks, yeah, they believed in the gods, Zeus, Poseidon. Yeah, they believed in the gods, but the gods were subject. They were underneath other more ultimate principles, right? We talked about fate and necessity. But what Nietzsche is saying here is that for Aeschylus, the ultimate principle to which the gods are subject is not fate or necessity, but rather some other principle, justice. Both God and man are weighed on the scales of justice. Both of them are judged accordingly. Hence, for Aeschylus, justice is a higher principle than Zeus or any god / pantheon. So Aeschylus is all about justice, right? He loves justice. He thinks that justice, for him, justice is like the ultimate principle. By the way, since this is a philosophy class, I should tell you that one of the most famous statements by postmodern philosopher Jacques Derrida. By the way, Derrida is the one who coined the phrase deconstruction. He said that the one indeconstructible, the one thing, the one reality that cannot be deconstructed is justice. And in that statement, Derrida is channeling the spirit of Nietzsche's Aeschylus, okay? But Aeschylus says that justice is the be-all and end-all. Justice is something that judges or critiques both human beings and the gods, okay? Aeschylus also dispenses with the necessary fate / punishment / suffering of an entire family. Okay, don't have time to go into this real quick, but anyone who studied Greek literature knows about the House of Atreus. The House of Atreus gets into hot water. Something really bad happens. Basically, it happens when the head of the household, aka the pater familias, Agamemnon. I think it's Agamemnon. Agamemnon decides to sacrifice his daughter. I think her name is Iphigenia. He sacrifices his daughter. By the way, Kierkegaard talks about this in Fear and Trembling in his discussion of Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac in Genesis 22. But the point is, the pater familias of the house of Atreus, I think it's Agamemnon, I hope it is, he sacrifices his daughter Iphigenia to the gods. And that's a horrible sin. At least in this context, it's a horrible thing. And his wife, whose name I can't remember right now, gets really mad at him. But the point is, Agamemnon's sin brings about a curse on the house of Atreus. And so generation after generation within the house of Atreus are suddenly fated for destruction. And that's not an unusual thing to happen in Greek literature. You can see similar things with Oedipus Rex, as I mentioned a moment ago. You can see similar things with Achilles in Homer's works. Aeschylus comes along and he says, "Oh no, that's not just. If Agamemnon's great grandson suffers because of Agamemnon's sins, that's not just." So Aeschylus also dispenses with the necessary fate or punishment or suffering of an entire family, aka or i.e. the house of Atreus, since A, this flies in the face of justice, and B, quote, there's no necessity for an individual to suffer. Oh, sorry, there's no necessity for an individual to commit a crime, okay? Now, I spent a little bit of time talking about Aeschylus. Now I'm going to talk about Sophocles. For Nietzsche, Sophocles is the opposite of Aeschylus. What is sublime for Sophocles is not justice, but rather the obscurity of justice. Remember how I said that for Aeschylus, man is close to the gods, or you could say maybe close to ultimate reality in this case. You might even say close to justice. The point is that for Aeschylus thinks that he does have a handle on justice. He does have a handle. He has a rational grasp on that which is ultimate. In his case, he thinks it's justice. But Sophocles comes along and says, no, we can't understand all that highfalutin stuff. What is sublime is not justice, but rather the obscurity of justice. For Sophocles, man is far away from the gods. So the gods are way up here, but man is way down here. There's a huge gulf or separation between man and the gods. Man is small, limited, weak, groveling in the dust. And there's a quote that I want to read to you. There's a quote in the case of Aeschylus. In the case of Aeschylus, this is paragraph 8, y'all. Paragraph 8, this is on page 132, about 2/3 of the way down. In the first full paragraph, and about in the middle of the first full paragraph, this is a quotation that I wanted to read. In the case of Aeschylus, revulsion is dissolved into a sublime shiver of awe at the wisdom of the world's order. Aeschylus stands in awe at the wisdom of the world's order, and he gets a shiver of delight. And that's a sublime feeling for him, right? So in the case of Aeschylus, revulsion is dissolved into a sublime shiver at the awe. It's dissolved into a sublime shiver of awe at the wisdom of the world's order, an order which is only difficult to recognize because of human weakness. So Aeschylus says, wow, the world is orderly. We can understand justice. That makes me so happy. That gives me a sense of pleasure. Sophocles comes along and says, no, wisdom is unfathomable. The world's a mystery. We can't understand anything. And for Nietzsche, he says that Sophocles derives pleasure from this, okay? So if you look at paragraph 9 near the bottom on page 132, which begins with the word piety, that whole paragraph is a hymn of praise to the spirit of Socrates. In other words, Nietzsche really likes Sophocles. Nietzsche is saying that Nietzsche has given Sophocles a high five because he admits that we can't understand truth. We can't understand science. We can't understand discursive reason. We can't understand. We can't put the truth about reality into any kind of philosophical truth. And so that's why Nietzsche gives a high five to Sophocles in that paragraph, the last full paragraph on page 132. That's kind of like a hymn of praise that Nietzsche writes. Every single sentence in that paragraph, at least after the first one, every single sentence ends with an exclamation point, okay? Now, y'all, the last thing that I wanted to talk about today is this issue of semblance versus symbol. Let me discuss that really, really quick. And then I want to come back to one final point, which for me is much more interesting. In the last two paragraphs, so I want to jump down to the last two paragraphs, then we're going to come back up to paragraphs 10 and 11. But in the last two paragraphs, Nietzsche is discussing semblance and symbol. And I'm going to read what my notes are. In the last two paragraphs, Nietzsche discusses semblance versus symbol. On the one hand, Nietzsche prefers semblance to the symbol, for it sticks closer to the euphoric escapism of the dream. In other words, a semblance is kind of like just a picture, right? A semblance is a picture that's just kind of like something you might dream about, right? Nietzsche loves dreams. Nietzsche wishes that he could be perpetually dreaming. And so a semblance is kind of like the image that you have of something in a dream. And that's why he likes it. And yet, he says, on the other hand, the symbol, not the semblance, but the symbol is closer to the truth about the primordial will, okay? In other words, Nietzsche likes symbol because he likes to dream. But Nietzsche likes semblance because he likes to dream. But on the other hand, he doesn't like semblance because it masks and covers up the truth about the Dionysian, okay? The symbol masks or veils the Dionysian force or will less than semblance. And in that sense, Nietzsche prefers the symbol, okay? So it's both. He sees an upside in the semblance. And what is the upside in semblance? It rescues us from the Dionysian. It rescues us from the horror of reality. What's the upside of symbol? It tells the truth a little bit about reality, because it's not, it's the symbol is one step away from a picture, okay? It's one step away from a picture. It's one step closer to what you might call discursive truth or science or something like that. And Nietzsche says it has a certain upside. The certain upside to the symbol is that it allows us, it unveils, it peels the veil away a little bit and gives us a glimpse into the Dionysian, into the horror of reality. Not too much, but a little bit. And so he likes it in that sense, okay? Now, y'all, I want to end this class. I want to end the class probably in 5 or 10 minutes with one last theme. And this is a theme that is near and dear to my heart. I've tried to talk about it over and over in this class in a lot of different ways. Certainly, this will pop up on your final exam. And I want to talk to you a little bit as we close. I want to talk to you about this issue of nihilism, right? We've talked about nihilism at various points in the class. Whenever I introduce Heraclitus, I'm trying to talk about nihilism, right? Heraclitus says, he agrees with Parmenides that the iPhone is not the same as the book, but for completely different reasons, right? Parmenides says that the iPhone is not the same as the book because he says that kind of diversity or multiplicity connotes non-being, and we have to whack a non-being. That's not what Heraclitus says. What Heraclitus says is that this phone, the reason it doesn't exist is because it actually flows in and out of the book, right? Think about Heraclitus's big statement, you can't step in the same river twice. Why? Because the river's always changing. In the same way, everything's changing. The iPhone is constantly changing. It's flowing in and out of the book. By the way, we do know that that's true, that the atoms of the iPhone are wafting in and out of it constantly. The same is true for our bodies. So there's a deep truth in the Heraclitean view, but my point is it's kind of nihilistic because he says that there's no such thing as trees. There's no such thing as human bodies. There's no such thing as love. There's no such thing as music. There's no such thing as male and female, right? All these things, they're just illusions. Or they're not illusions, they're constructs because they flow in and out of each other. Human beings look at them and say, oh, there's a leaf. But it's not really a leaf. We just think that it's a leaf. And so we're projecting that idea that we get out of our heads. We're projecting that idea onto the leaf. That's the sort of thing that Cratylus and Heraclitus want to say, right? And I'm calling that nihilism. And I've talked about Genesis 1:2. The earth was formless and void. And I've said to you that is an articulation of nihilism in a certain sense, because it's saying that at that moment, if you can talk this way, in Genesis 1:2, there's no such thing as form. There's no such thing as order. There's no such thing as design. There's no such thing as structure. There's no such thing as beauty. There's no such thing as true or false. There's no such thing as male or female. There's only chaos. The earth was a formless void, and darkness hovered over the surface of the deep. There's just darkness, deep, depth, void, chaos, right? That's nihilism. And the point there is that for Christianity and Judaism and Islam, theology is a hair's breadth from nihilism. It's very interesting to me that Christianity does not deny the truth of nihilism. It does not deny the truth of Heraclitus. It does not deny the truth of Nietzsche. Okay? Now, let me read paragraph 10 to you at the bottom of page 132. which begins on this level, okay? On this level of knowledge, there are only two paths, Nietzsche says, the path of the saint and the path of the tragic artist. What they both have in common is the ability to carry on living even in the clearest knowledge of the nullity of existence without sensing rupture in their view of the world. Nietzsche is saying that really there's only two options available to human beings in the face of the tragic nature, the horrific, traumatic nature of existence, aka the primordial one, the primordial will, the swirling vortex of chaotic forces. Given the fact that that's what's truly real, Nietzsche says, there's only two responses. You've got the artist response, which is what's going on with Greek tragedy. But then he says, you've got the response of the saint. Both the saint and the artist are able to carry on living even in the clearest knowledge of the nullity of existence without sensing a rupture in their view of the world. So let me put it to you like this. If you're a Christian, if I'm a Christian, you are not called, according to Nietzsche, you're not called to pretend like reality is hunky-dory. You're not called to be shiny, happy people all the time. Actually, Christians are called to acknowledge and admit the traumatic, dark, chaotic dimension of reality. This is why Christians celebrate Good Friday, in which Christ dies on the cross, and all we can countenance is blackness and death and destruction and injustice and chaos, okay? And if you're Catholic or if you're Anglican, then you might know that in the Good Friday service, we chant Psalm 22, which is so depressing. It's about dogs licking the wounds of Christ. It's about Christ being abandoned. It's utterly chaotic, utterly depressing, utterly black, utterly nihilistic. Christians don't look away from nihilism. Christians don't paper mache over nihilism. Christians don't deny the truth about nihilism. Christians do not live their lives in denial of nihilism. No, they admit it, they look at it, they have the clearest knowledge, Nietzsche says, of the nullity of existence. I'm going to continue reading. Disgust at the continuation of life is felt to be a means of creation, either saintly creation or artistic. The terrifying or the absurd is uplifting because it is only seemingly terrible or absurd. By the way, I would say that there's a better way for Nietzsche to say that. I think that what a Christian, someone like Dostoevsky, someone like Soren Kierkegaard might say, there's other Christians that I could come up with here. I think that what Dostoevsky, for example, would say would be something like this, maybe Walker Percy. The terrifying or the absurd is uplifting because it is only penultimately terrible or absurd. In other words, Christians do say that, yes, there's absurdity packed into existence, but it's not ultimate, it's only penultimate. It's not the final word. Genesis 1-2 is not the final word. Genesis 1-2 is in the Bible, and yet God comes along and he brings order to the chaos, okay? So I want to restate the sentence by saying the terrifying or absurd is uplifting because it is only penultimately terrible or absurd. The Dionysiac power of enchantment proves itself even here at the very summit of this view of the world. All that is real is dissolved in semblance, and behind it is the unified nature of the will, which manifests itself, completely cloaked in the glory of wisdom and truth in blinding radiance. Illusion, delusion at its peak. That last sentence, illusion, delusion, is at its peak. That's a scary, depressing sentence. Nietzsche's basically glorifying the notion of illusion and delusion. Basically, Nietzsche is advocating and recommending that we be self-deluded. But I still think that that paragraph does open a space for what you might call Christian nihilism. And he talks about it in terms of the saint, okay? Y'all, that's it for me. I've got 5:15. I hope y'all are well. Read the last section of paragraph 4. Y'all, I want to encourage you to read that section. I want to encourage you to study. Your final exam is right around the corner, and I'm not going to simply spoon feed you the answers for the final exam. So you're going to have to pay attention. You're going to have to do some reading. You're going to have to do some work, okay? Have a great weekend. I will see you on Monday, and may the force be with you. Take care.